Today is Thursday, April 25th, 2024. You have found the Living Youth Podcast. My name is John Robinson. I'm here once again with my podcast co-host, Mr. Wallace Smith. Mr. Smith, are you headed out of town anytime soon?
I am. In fact, I'm only taking half a day today because I have to kind of prepare for that trip a bit, though coming in for the podcast. Excited about that, and I've got 1 or 20 articles that I need to finish. So taking a half day to prepare for that. We are going to the Northeast Family Weekend.
Nice.
Very much looking forward to that.
Where is that?
I think it's in Massachusetts this year, at a place they're going to see.
Bit of a drive.
Yeah, but we're real excited about seeing people there again and hanging out with folks. So yeah, we're looking forward to it.
So what do we have for discussion today?
Today on the podcast, we are going to be talking about how women reflect God's image as well. Sometimes people think just men reflect God's image, and that would be a mistake. Women reflect God's image as well, we do as humanity. And in particular, we're going to have a special sort of focus in terms of how women's reflection of God's image, how those are specifically sort of communicated in their roles as wives and mothers.
Excellent. Let's talk about it.
Thank you, Jake and Julia, and welcome again to the Living Youth Podcast here at the end of April during the days of unleavened bread. We hope you've had some very good fellowship with others on the first holy day. I know we did, and hope you've enjoyed some very not fluffy at all bread so far and having some of that every day. Today's topic concerning the ladies, Mr. Robinson, you're the one that actually suggested this topic today. What's behind that suggestion?
I recently had a conversation with a young mother of 2 who listens to the podcast fairly regularly and suggested a topic. And it truly is one. I was glad she suggested it, and I feel very strongly about it. Which is, how to not even convince, but reassure younger women who've likely not been married yet that being a wife and a mother is truly a special and treasured position in society because of how much modern society has really downgraded that role. And I there has been a bit of a comeback in defense of, what it used to be just moms. Now we have to call them stay-at-home moms to make the distinction. But I remember for a while growing up, the idea from the more progressive feminist women was you're practically wasting your abilities and talents by staying home and raising your children and serving your family, which is a real shame because God certainly does not view it that way. I have one scripture here off the top that I would like to make a reference to. How honored a position is being a wife and a mother? Well, God in Proverbs, or inspired in Proverbs 18:22 to say, "He who finds a wife finds a good thing and obtains favor from the Lord." I like these 2 other translations. The one who has found a good wife has found what goodness is and obtained a delightful gift from the Lord. I like it when it's delightful. And then one other one, the man who finds a wife finds a treasure and he receives favor from the Lord. And I can't just off the top as we introduce this topic, I can't think of a better way to introduce it to anybody who kind of wonders about that role. The first thing we should say is, what does God think about it? Well, he says when a man finds this thing, he has been given a treasure of almost incalculable value.
Right. Those verses should mean something to us. And we need God's word to burn brightly in our minds because the world is constantly trying to tell us the opposite. When on the way here, my wife and I are taking care of tasks today during the kind of halftime that we're using to prepare for the trip. What did she mention? Oh, she asked what the topic was today, and when I mentioned it to her, man, she just lit up in a really positive way. She was excited we were talking about this, I've probably told this story before, but I'll add a little bit to it here on the podcast. But when she was younger, we grew up in the 70s, early 80s or so, in terms of when she would have been in school, because she was homeschooled for most of her life. But when she was in school, there was a teacher who had asked the class what they wanted to be, and she's going around and she asked my wife what she wanted to be when she grew up, and my wife said a wife and a mother. She was looking forward to being that. And the teacher just dismissed that like, oh, is that all? Is that all you want to do? I
Right,
mean,
is
you're
that
real, and
all?
this is a
Yeah,
child,
yeah.
right? And so you have this adult, and my wife said just she remembers as a young child feeling guilty, like she had set the bar so low, like she should do more. So
She's
you have that generation that was dealing with that, and then even now, I mean, again, my wife and I are in our early 50s, and every once in a while, even now, it's kind of related to a conversation she and I had a few days ago, kind of hearkening back to the old fake world and data. Their brains are always absorbing data. And because the world so blatantly and broadly keeps telling women that they're really not valuable unless they're like men, essentially, unless they're more
Yeah,
masculine,
exactly.
doing
The
doing the
irony.
roles, that she says that she still has to remind herself on occasion that what she does really is valuable. And thankfully, as she said in the car, she said she does recognize it. And part of doing that is understanding how God sees these roles. We have to learn not to value things based on how the world values them or doesn't value them. We have to learn to see through God's eyes. And God makes it plain in Scripture that He values women as women, and He values what He designed in the female sex. And one of the ways we thought about that, as Mr. Robinson and I were trying to prepare today, was I had given a sermon. Boy, I don't even know how long ago it was now.
It's at least 6 or 7 years ago. I
Wow,
think
okay, it
about
was some
6 years
time ago.
Yeah.
Titled "Woman by Design." I remember being really nervous about it because I'm not a woman. But spoiler, Robinson, I'm not a
Well,
woman.
hey, I've got an anecdotal story to support you.
Oh, to support the fact that I'm not a
Right.
woman.
Yeah.
I definitely
So-
do want to know.
So yesterday, I also was having a conversation with my wife about the possibility of doing this topic, and my younger daughter Ella was in the car with us, and I think I said something along the lines of, "Well, I think one of the ways we could cover the topic," and Ella, just like in there, like a lightning bolt, just says, "Well, by having a wife on the podcast," and I said, no, it wouldn't be mansplaining if we had a wife on the podcast. And so that, thankfully, everybody thought that was funny. We are
Yeah.
not men, which is why we're
No, we are
women.
men.
We are men. We are not women. I would say two things about that, though, even though I'm kind of stepping on your lines here, Mr.
No, feel free.
One, if we as men take seriously the scriptures that talking about dwelling with our wives with understanding, and obviously you would have to have a wife to fit specifically in that category, you can learn a lot about the feminine through your wife. But the more important thing is we have God's own description in the scriptures, which is what you were leading us into.
It's not a mistake
Yeah.
that some of the key passages about marriage were penned by the Apostle Paul, who I know some might disagree with this, but when I look at the evidence, it doesn't seem like he had a wife that he was
Yeah,
bringing around.
it
It
really
was married.
doesn't.
It's a matter of understanding what the Bible says, and I would say, I know I can speak for my wife that actually bringing her on the podcast seems like that would be one of the she would
hate
definitely
that.
not want that. That's exactly right. She would definitely not want that. However, we do get feedback all the time from them, and appreciate that very much. And I know when I prepared this sermon way back when, I really did lean on her for that, to make sure that what I was saying did seem to be things that would encourage her, because they are vital things concerning what God says. So what we thought we would do is go through some of the points, not all of the points in that sermon, but we will link to the sermon. If you teens and young adults go out to livingyouth.org, we will do our best on this post to make sure there's a link to the sermon, Woman by Design. However, the focus of that sermon was trying to highlight the fact that when God made man, it's very plain in Genesis, we're not going to go through all the details, that he made man and woman. He called them man, as in humanity, and that they, both male and female, reflect God's image and reflect his design in that way. He has designed them to reflect himself. And even though God and Jesus reveal themselves as masculine, they are definitely in the masculine mode. We don't want those Bibles that turn everything gender neutral, which is just a bunch of woke garbage. But that said, it does not mean that both man and woman don't individually, in their own ways, reflect various aspects about their Creator. And so in this particular podcast, we're going to focus on just a few. The sermon goes through a few more, but we're going to focus on a few of the ways in which women reflect their creator, like take aspects of God and reflect them in a special way. In fact, if women, like let's say as an entire sex, decided not to reflect these things, it would actually mean that God himself is not being fully reflected in humanity, because men don't generally reflect these things in exactly the same way. So we're going to take some of those, but then we're going to also comment as we talk about them with wives and mothers in mind, particularly in terms of the role of being a wife and a mother, and how in that role some of these particular aspects of God's own nature and character are given an opportunity to shine. Does that sound like what we're doing,
That
Robinson?
sounds exactly like what we're doing.
Oh, yay for me.
Because this is a little bit of a different slant from the sermon, which I listened to. That's how I knew it was about 6 years ago, actually, because I know where I was when I listened to the sermon. And I thought it was really great. And my favorite part about that whole sermon is where you took, I would say, aspects of the feminine that used to be widely accepted by most everybody, that are now in question and controversial because this idea that so many things are a social construct.
Right.
Okay, meaning we just made it up on our own. Because, Mr. Smith, well, I love those meetings that us men have where we decide how we want the women to behave and we control.
The official man conventions, or we decide, how things are going to be for the rest of the
And
world.
as a man, I can tell a woman how to act like a woman, even though I don't even know,
I hear about those conventions. I've never been to one. I don't think they exist. I think
I think you might be right. So
okay.
We don't know, and it's there's so many things that are just hardwired to the feminine and to the masculine. And I really liked, though, how you took these attributes of women that, again, used to be widely accepted as just realistic, but tied them back to our Creator, who himself functioned in these roles. And I really wondered when, because when you started off with that women are helpers and they want to be helpful. And I thought, okay, how are you going to navigate this one? Because that's, controversial in some circles these days.
And let's highlight where that comes from.
Yeah.
When God made woman, he made man and woman. And when he made woman in particular, part of his thinking was illustrated in Genesis chapter 2. He says in Genesis 2 and verse 18, it says, "And the eternal God said, it is not good that man should be alone." And that should be something out there for those men who like to boast to their wives. I don't need you. Well, that's not actually the way God designed things. He designed marriage to work together. He says, "Not good that man should be alone. I will make him a helper comparable to him." That is, I will make him a helper that corresponds well to him, that is made fit for him. Mm-hmm. So they kind of like puzzle pieces fit together.
It's a completing role,
right? And the word there, in terms of comparable, is from the word konegdo, and I might be saying it wrong. I apologize. I should have looked it up ahead of time. But it means someone who is a comparable counterpart. If you have a matching pair, the konegdo is the other part of that pair, like your left hand and your right hand. When you clasp your hands, it's obvious they were made to go together, right? They were made. If you had two right hands, that wouldn't go quite as well. That would be unusual.
There'd be some challenges.
Yeah. So the woman was made to complement the man, not to be another man, not to be a complete exact replica, but rather to have things that the man doesn't, and to not necessarily have some of the things that the man might have. Yeah. So they actually are complementary to each other.
Well, I think one way you could put it is like you said, the feminine and the masculine are both aspects of God's character. Okay, but they're also kind of specialized roles. He specialized the masculine to do certain things and be good at it and want to do it, and the same thing for the feminine. But I liked how you pointed out clearly that our Creator himself serves in this role. So,
the word Ezer. Yeah, the word help. The word help comes from Ezer, and that means literally someone who helps another person in their time of need. And that is something God uses for himself, right?
Yep. Psalm 33:20. Our soul waits for the Lord. He is our help and our shield. And then you highlight about 8 different verses there that we could turn to where we show our Creator, the pre-incarnate Christ. Sorry for that phrasing, but I can't think of a better way to describe
I love that phrase. I use it a lot.
Over and over acting as an aid to us, as a helper.
A
to
help.
us. He constantly helps us. I mean, in fact, that's the description of the Holy Spirit is
The helper.
the helper,
Yes.
helping element.
You know, thank you for pointing that out, because that's one thing. It's easy to look at the word help there. It's like, oh, I'm just a help. That's what I am. It's like that word there, God literally, thank you for highlighting that. And in the sermon, there's multiple verses. God applies to himself. He says, I, Israel, am your help. Why in the world would we think that being a help to others is degrading, is low, is not valuable? Well, I will tell you why. Because the devil is a liar, and he has built a society around us that wants women to feel like that is a low position, as opposed to the kind of thing that is necessary for the world to actually function.
Yeah. No, I love that, because I was thinking something similar, but you kind of said it, which was, for young women that marriage is ahead of them, or women that are already in that role, you should take pride in it, because you are fulfilling a function that Christ himself fulfilled for us and continues to fulfill for us, and that is helping us through this difficult life. And to help not just your husband, because here's the thing, I think we'll probably get to this, but you can't really separate the idea of being a wife and being a mother. And I've mentioned them before. Mary Harrington and Louise Perry both have written on this thing.
And these are
kind of topics.
Generally secular. They're not in the church. These are just women out in the world.
Not at all. That's part of what's great about it is I loved the idea that there were women who weren't necessarily religious as we might think of it, although I think one of them has the proclivity a bit, but they're definitely coming at it from a secular point of view, and they have just honestly analyzed the data, as it were, and evaluated our choices in the modern era, and how frankly they find it's actually not worked out well. For the feminism has not helped women,
right?
And when you're pregnant, then when you have a child and you're nursing and you're caring for a newborn, which is entirely helpless, you better have a partner with you can trust in and rely on, who's going to take care of everything else. That's going to get the family fed, that's going to keep the heat on in the winter, that's going to keep the lights on. And they suggest we call that a husband. So so the role of a wife, I mean, and I know some people think, well, I'm a single mother, and I mean the ones who wanted it to be that way. I feel like they didn't. And I don't mean.
Maybe we should say that here at the beginning. We recognize there's a lot of different circumstances in the world, and the Bible talks about those as well. And we're very particularly focused today on trying to make sure that our teens and young adults understand that if you're female and you're looking at a future of being a wife and a mother, and understanding that is something that is worth desiring. Do not buy into the world's idea that is not something worth desiring. And so, definitely there are other roles, and there's other things in life and different circumstances. There are, suddenly, women whose husbands die young or various circumstances. We're not trying to say those circumstances don't exist. We're trying to reverse the flow of the world's terrible satanic value system when it comes to the roles that God has designed.
Yeah. What I had in mind, which I appreciate you helping me clarify that, was specifically really more progressive feminist women that feel like, why do I need a man? I don't need a man. And you can have your child and not have a husband, but they deceive themselves because, as others have pointed out, you're just married to the government, or you're married to the state, or you're married, like somebody still fulfills those roles. There's a police force that'll come when you call them. Like you have something protecting you, or you have a daycare that's being paid for possibly by federal funding or whatever. I mean, I know daycare is really expensive, but anyway, I'm just saying you've just outsourced a role that already was there with the husband and the wife configuration.
Right. And my wife was making the point today. I'd like to actually think about this more, because it's the first time she said something like this, but And I'm going to make up numbers. Please do not think these are meant to be accurate numbers. We haven't used actually childcare, so I'm not going to say they are. But if you are having other people, a childcare service, take care of your children for say $20 an hour, so that you can work a $30 an hour job, then really you're not. You're working a $10 an hour job. You are making $10 for the hour, every hour you're putting into that job. because you're having to pay somebody else, the $20 an hour, right? Now, admittedly, if you don't do that, you're not making that $10 an hour. But at the same time, thing is that there are trade-offs in all of that, So it's not just that you're doing all this work for $10 an hour. It's also time not spent, with children, and they are in the care of someone else. Yep. And those kinds of roles aren't appreciated as much as they should be. So we want to make sure that you understand, and you actually started touching on being compassionate, nurturing. We're going to get to that here in a moment. But this idea of being a helper, do not let someone downgrade that in your mind. In fact, it is worth, as a young adult and as a teen, to invest in learning, how can I be a better help for my future husband and future children? How can I prepare now in my teen years, in my early 20s, your age? What can I do now to help be prepared? Because I tell you, for instance, the state of schools right now, who knows if Christ doesn't return what the state of schools are going to be in 10 years or 15 years. Now's the time to kind of prepare. Would I actually be capable of homeschooling children? What do I need to do now to actually prepare? What's going to be the state of food? What are prices going to be like? Now's the time to invest, to be the helper you are. And I can say, Mr. Robinson and I were kind of talking about it earlier, my wife and I were talking about it, I need a helper. The time I mentioned earlier, several podcasts ago, when my family was gone for camp and it was just me, I was less productive. And the only way I could become as productive as I would normally be is just not take care of myself as well. I just started to fall apart. So, I say fall apart. I wasn't like sobbing in the corner, Mr. Robinson.
You hadn't shaved in a week. And just...
But still, it clearly, life was kind of failing. And I could not do half the things that I do if it weren't for my wife's constant support.
You wouldn't be able to dedicate yourself to your role in the church, both at headquarters and your editing role, and then of course as a minister, there's a role you still fulfill and periodically going out and visiting areas, as you're about to do in a week. You couldn't dedicate it to yourself in the same way if you didn't have an incredibly, Miss Janine, props to you.
In fact, even right now, we're recording this podcast. What does she do? She's out running errands that we need to prepare for this weekend. So
much respect.
All right. We move on to the next point? Or?
Yeah, let's go.
All right.
I think
So the next point is in terms of reflecting God. And it's so funny. Did you add... I'm sorry, I'm going to jump ahead, but did you add Isaiah 49 to this, or was that already in there?
It was in there.
I'm so glad.
I went and got it.
I didn't notice it.
You put the citation.
Yeah, I didn't notice it. But when I was looking at these notes real quickly, I thought, I need to make sure I throw Isaiah 49 in there, and it was already there. Okay, so here's the point. I apologize for getting a bit ahead. But women, by God's design, tend to be more compassionate and more nurturing. That is, of the two sexes. And again, we're not talking about every individual to every degree. But if you look on the whole, on average, when you look at men and women, generally women tend to be more compassionate and tend to be more nurturing.
Well, when we were
like
talking,
God is.
Our show prep, I was talking about, I do find I'm using the idea of the big five personality traits more and more because they are well established, like generally they're not argued over that these are key
kind of
traits.
Generally understood to be key traits.
Yep, okay. Key personality traits that the masculine and the feminine both have. But so, for example, like the one of agreeability. Would you be surprised to know that men tend to be more disagreeable than women, and women tend to be more agreeable? And so then you might think, well, how do they overlap each other? And so the example I like to use is if you take a very disagreeable woman, she's up in the 90th percentile of disagreeable.
When you say disagreeable, you mean kind of hard to get along with?
A little more.
We want to make sure we explain that.
It might be easier to what is agreeable. Just more go with the flow, avoid conflict.
Okay.
The more disagreeable you are, the more you don't mind having a bit of conflict.
Having conflict.
And
okay.
even I would even say what your threshold for what constitutes threshold.
Conflict.
Conflict is different. Because like I've seen this over and over. You kind of a group setting and maybe a little bit of something contentious comes up. Like I remember one time it was about vaccines and pros and cons, and the men are kind of bantering back and forth about it, and then later you find the women are stressed out by it because it seemed like a big argument. And the men were like, "Oh,
no, we're just talking."
Yeah, we're just talking. Yeah. And so anyway, so if you took one of the most disagreeable women, and that sounds so inherently negative, and it's not necessarily.
No, you're talking about the personality
Yeah,
trait.
yep.
Yes. So one who's more eager for conflict, perhaps,
Yeah.
etc.
Yes. So if you took that 95th percentile woman, 99th percentile woman, and put them on the men's chart, you're only in the middle. So you are more disagreeable than about half the men, but the other half of the men
Still more disagreeable than you.
You need to work on your disagreeability if you want to be like man level.
Yeah, and when you say 95th percentile, you don't mean better than the others. You're just talking about the rarity.
Yes,
that if
yeah,
you take
yeah.
that rare someone who's in that rare 5% of being the women who are most prone to being open to conflict and disagreeable, they still fall under half the men. That's interesting.
I took the. They say you're not supposed to call them a test, but
Personality
I took the
survey or something.
and I was actually very agreeable for a man. I was about, I think, 80 or 81% agreeable. I know my wife was surprised as well. And but if you took me and put me as agreeable as I am as a man and put me on the women's chart, I'm down, in the 30s or something.
Yeah, you'd be a. It's good to know you're a rare woman,
Yeah,
Mr. Robinson.
thank you,
That's good.
thank you.
It's very rare for a woman.
So here's my point, though.
Okay.
When you take the personality trait that is just more willing to deal with a fussy infant and the care and the compassion and the tolerance for it, women are off the chart compared to men.
Or I'd say a fussy husband and the care and compassion.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And I can't remember exactly. There's been a couple different authors that have talked about this, and one of them kind of frames it this way. Something about the men, and the question isn't. I wish I could remember what the question is, but the answer is more like, how come you don't throw the fussy infant out the window, and the women can tolerate it, and the men would be like, let's do something about this fussy baby.
That's fascinating. I think before we jump to the verses, this is in reverse order here of our notes, but let me just make sure. I thought the article in the Atlantic was good to bring up because this is not just Mr. Robinson, Mr. Smith, saying things. There was an article, and I saw it in more than one place, but I know for the sermon, I grabbed this one out of the Atlantic. But it was from their February 18th, 2018 issue, and the title of the article was "The More Gender Equality, the Fewer Women in STEM," that is science, tech, engineering, and mathematics careers. Now, here's what the article talked about. There was a study, and I'll just read what the article said about the study. It said, a new study explores a strange paradox. In countries that empower women, they are less likely to choose math and science professions. Now, that does seem like a paradox. It's been called a paradox, but it's not a paradox when they really look at it. Their basic idea is when it comes to science careers, tech careers, engineering careers, and mathematics careers that tend to pay more, that in societies where women are not as honored, as protected, as safe, then the women tend to be driven to try to find those careers more because they have to take care of themselves. They have to earn an income. They can't count on anyone ever going to take care of them, versus societies that have large social safety nets where the women aren't as worried about their future. They're not worried that if their husband dies, they've got 4 kids, what are they going to do? So they're far freer in those societies to choose what they want to do. And when they do, they don't tend to choose science, tech, engineering, and math programs. They tend to pursue careers. Again, it's an average. We're talking about a tendency. They tend to pursue careers that are more in these compassionate and nurturing roles, like when it comes to nursing, when it comes to caring for the elderly, when it comes these things where they're actually nurturing and caring for others. And I thought, we joked about mansplaining earlier. I just thought it was ridiculous. There was another article on this topic from Ireland. It was the Journal. I can't do an Irish accent, but it's called the Journal. And in that, they interviewed a professor who was bothered by the findings that women do this. And so he said, because he was saying, we got to understand the motivations of these women. Because what he said was, if we can understand their motivations, then interventions can be designed to help them change their minds. And I thought, that is ridiculous. Here you have women that are free to make their own choices, and this is what they're choosing. And now we have a man, and he wouldn't be alone. There's going to be a lot of feminist women that would agree, who says, well, we can't have this. We can't have these women choosing these careers. We've got to somehow convince them to pick other careers. That's an example of someone who's not learning from a study. That's someone who's driven by the way society should be, and the study tells them they got to change it in different ways. It's so frustrating.
It is frustrating because it gets pushed all the time, although it's not immediately obvious. But there's a lot of people that want to restructure society, and they want to use technology to override our basic programming.
Yeah.
If I can put it that way. I mean, the masculine and the feminine both have really baked in things. This applies here as well. I've heard this over and over again, studied over and over again. Men in general are more interested in things. We're working on a car, building the iPhone, things. And women are far more interested in people and relationships. And it's always been that way, and it's still this way, no matter how much we want to fight against it and use technology to overcome it. At our base, that's really what we want to do. And then, as you pointed out, when the women had the safety net and the freedom to actually take on a job that doesn't pay as well, they did it because it was more in line with
their proclivities, with their natural tendencies. Yeah. So, in fitting with the theme of today's program, how does that reflect God? It's important to recognize. This had come to mind because we did a Bible study in Isaiah for the LE kids recently. And Isaiah 49 has this beautiful passage. He's writing in Isaiah 49. He's being inspired to write what God is thinking concerning Israel, who is going through punishments and about to go through punishments, and how they will feel forsaken by God, like forgotten by God. And so he writes in Isaiah 49, starting in verse 14, "But Zion said, 'The Eternal has forsaken me, and my Lord has forgotten me.'" Like this, my God just doesn't even notice me anymore and is gone and has left me. And then he replies, that is, God replies to that thought in verse 15. "Can a woman forget her nursing child and not have compassion on the son of her womb? Surely they may forget, yet I will not forget you." I think it's just a beautiful passage because, it would be insane to think of a woman, her child is nursing and she having to care for it, and yet she could just forget it. Like, I forgot to feed the baby the last 3 days or something like that. And God says, no, that's insane. And yet it's more sane than the idea that I would forget you. God is so incredibly compassionate and nurturing. And how do you survive a relationship with Israel if you're not a compassionate and loving God that overlooks things that others just wouldn't be able to? And in being compassionate and nurturing, a woman has an opportunity to reflect her Creator, Himself, His characteristics, His nature, in a way that men just tend not to reflect in the same way by design.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. I mean, men are not well suited to care for a needy newborn, which needs a ton of attention and a ton of patience, and just biologically, a woman is configured ideally to care for the needs of a newborn child.
Right, and it's not that we don't care for babies; of course we do. Mm-hmm. But that said, it is different, and there's times when I got to admit, with my kiddos, when I'm caring for them, and like she's busy doing something, I'm often emulating her example. Yeah. I'm often thinking, what would Janine do right now? With the kiddos, so.
Yeah, and there is a difference, though, and I only learned this relatively recently, which is, of course, when a mother has a child, she's already tightly bonded to it. I mean, it's grown in the mom. It's bonded through chemical reactions. The what is it again? No, not Pitocin. I think that's how you.
What chemical is it?
Yeah, what are the.
I don't know. It's hormones.
It'll come back to me. I know what it is. It'll come back to me.
All right.
But with dads, it's not. The dad bonding comes later. And so, as one of the authors I read put it, the first key to becoming a father is sticking around. Because you will bond with the child over time.
Because your bonding comes later over time. Oh, it's fascinating. That is interesting. The New Testament example I thought of was in Matthew 23 and verse 37, where Jesus Christ is talking about Jerusalem, where he's just so pained knowing what's coming for Jerusalem. And he says, "O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the one who kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to her. How often I wanted to gather your children together as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, but you were not willing. And I thought, he could have said, how often I've wanted to fight for you like an angry rooster, but he didn't. He expressed this other side, why would he pick the female in this case, the hen? Because that's the best way to picture no one thinks of roosters as compassionate. They think of them as tough, and fighting, and that's great. There's times for that in the barnyard, I would assume. However, when it comes time to desire to nurture and to protect in that kind of way with your love and your compassion, he used the hen, so there's an opportunity to reflect Christ in that way.
So I don't know why, but that one has always actually really hit home with me.
Really?
It's something about the way, not just that scripture, but the others around it are crafted, because though there's no compromise with sin, with God and with Jesus Christ, and there are consequences for it, that doesn't do away with his deep compassion and wish that it would be otherwise. That unfortunately we have to go through trial and tribulation to learn the lesson and get to where we need. And when I hit that scripture and read it, for some reason that one just really makes me feel that like it really is motherly, and it doesn't seem weird. You could see Christ feeling that way and being very sincere about it. And, hey, I wish it could be otherwise. I wish you guys would respond and turn to me, and I would protect you like a mother protects her chicks. And frankly, we all kind of want that, whether we admit it or not.
Right.
And so I love that one.
Oh, good.
I found my bonding chemical.
Oh, you did? What is
Oxytocin.
it? Oxytocin. So, yeah, that's common enough. It makes me feel bad I didn't think of it. So, good job. Thank you, Robinson. Right. Okay, let's move on to the next point. And this one is this, in terms of the design of women. In general, talking about trends, talking about there can be all sorts of variations and degrees, but in general, women are designed to care more about intimacy and relationships. Then we've already kind of broached this topic earlier. When it comes to, and I will speak to that, when it comes to being a wife and being a mother, caring more in the sense about the quality of the relationships in the family does make a difference. There's a certain kind of special glue that, one of my favorite songs from the 80s is Our House by Madness. Is that the name of the band? Okay. I love that song. And it's one of those few songs I think I can just plainly recommend. I can't think of a bad word in it. Yeah. And it really is. I think I've even looked at the history of the song. I need to be careful. You never know. You're like, wow, it was all just a secret song about drugs and stuff.
But did you hear all that cussing in the...
Exactly right, in the background. But no, I think I have looked into it. And my understanding, I could be wrong, is that it's just straight up exactly what it seems. It's these guys reminiscing about growing up and what their family and their house and what it was like to have their house and have their friends over. Yeah, and there's a line in it. It's talking about dad getting ready for work and mom caring about how her house looked. And there's a line in it where it says, because she packs them off and sends them to school. And in the song it says, because I can't say to kiss them on the head, but regardless, she sends them off to school. And speaking of the mom, it said she's the one they're going to miss in lots of ways. It's not they don't miss their older brother or sister, and they don't miss their dad, but there's a special role that she played. And in the song, he says, she's the one they're going to miss in lots of ways. And it was, so I love that, because it talked about in their memories of being a family and doing the things in their house together and having their friends over, that there was something special about mom's role. And part of that is because moms often are the ones that care that you don't just go off to school. I get you to school on time, but that you go off happy and that you feel good about where you're going. And they add kind of like oil to gears. They can be that kind of thing that really helps things work smoothly because they care about those relationships.
That's what a great example. In no way diminishing dad's role, because dad also in his own way is central.
Oh yeah.
But I was thinking, I like you use the lubricating idea. That's probably better. I was going to say it's kind of like the glue that holds everything.
See, that's where I was going, but then I came up with the whole oil and the gears and I decided to go with that.
It makes it smooth. I've got that section, that lyric. It's a little shade of dad here. Father gets up late for work. Mother has to iron his shirt. Then she sends the kids to school, sees them off all with a small kiss. She's the one they're going to miss in lots of ways.
Yeah, exactly. I got to admit, that would be me getting up late and my wife having to take care of my shirt, because I'm behind. So I love that song. I every time it comes on, I make sure I listen to it because I enjoy it. And those things do matter. It can be frustrating. Like for my wife, I think this is part of it, the heart of this. For guys, sometimes if there's some difficulty or stuff, it's like, well, we'll get over it. Or especially for boys, given that we didn't have any girls, man, the boys just had to figure some things out. And so things are going to be rough between them or frustrating, or they have to learn how to be young men, adolescents in the same house. And it would just drive my wife crazy. Sometimes it was the noise, because they could be very noisy. But even then, it was just the idea that there was no, that there maybe wasn't a certain kind of respect, or even if it was just kind of, well, is on the surface respect, but deep down was not yet. And so our perspectives were very different. I felt they needed to work through that, and you can't just snap your fingers and make respect. You can bring the forms of respect, but there has to be, some things. But part of it was just the strained relationship between them was far more difficult on her, versus I saw it as something that was working itself out over time. Who was it? I heard Mr. Carl McNair said this once. I ought to ask his sons to see if it's not made up. But once he was talking about how, it might have been a sermon, that as boys get older, well, it's kind of hard for two bulls to be in the same paddock or the same field. Eventually you need your own field, and you have to learn how to navigate each other. You both have sharp, pointy horns as bull. You have to learn that until you have your own place, and then you have your own place, and actually things chill quite a bit. But still, the friction there was far more difficult on my wife than it was for me.
That makes a lot of sense. And so I was just recently listening to this podcast with Mary Harrington, where she was going through some of these things, and one of the things she lamented was that men don't have their own spaces anymore where they're just around men. And one of her main reasons was, as she said, and she might be quoting something else, only men can civilize other men.
Interesting.
And I think that there's something true. There's some truth to that. It's like in the book Wild at Heart, one of the key points is only another man can actually validate a young man and make him feel like he's a man who can do the job. And when boys don't get that, they kind of carry a bit of an insecurity in, and they know it, and they try to fill it with the golden-haired woman, as he puts it, just the every woman, and they'll try, but they can't do it the way another man can. Now, if a man's been properly, we'll say civilized for now, but just a good, proper, upstanding man that we would all respect, the woman can work with that and take it further. But the key aspect is only other. And she talked about how the boys kind of get in there, mix it up like you're talking about, and they sort the pecking order out, and then we kind of like rein each other in a little bit, and this is acceptable and this is not acceptable.
That's interesting. Yes.
I know you could pick me apart if you went through civilization and be like, well, what about the cannibals or whatever? I was like, okay.
Right, but you're trying to be simple. Yeah. You're trying to focus on simple principles, and I appreciate that, because I was thinking in a way that you've kind of put words to. When it came to the boys, I was far more about the rules, right? Like I could see them sometimes stewing about each other in their hearts, and I definitely want to shape their hearts. But at the same time, it's kind of hard to reach in there and do that, right? So I'd focus so much on their actions, and it wasn't until something tended to break out, one wants to punch the other or something, then I jump in, versus the actual feelings of each for each other would be more important for my wife than it would be for me. And at the same time, we need that.
Yep.
I need to be reminded of such things. I need an example like that. And I think as well, that's part of why I picked the verse that I did, is it's easy sometimes to see God and Christ as if our relationship with them is something that's purely transactional. Look, here's a bunch of rules, and if you do these rules, then we're all going to get along, and if you don't do these rules, we're not going to. So make sure you follow the rules, and there's not going to be any trouble, as if that's it. But the Bible is plain that it is not just that. It's not just making sure we're all following the rules. It is a relationship. Jesus Christ and God the Father want to build a relationship with us, and that desire is very much reflected in the design of women to focus on intimacy and relationships in a way that men don't naturally by their design. And the verse I picked to kind of illustrate that about our Creator is John 17 and verse 3, where Jesus Christ makes plain, "This is eternal life, that they may know you, the only true God, and Jesus Christ, whom you have sent." Now, admittedly, you can't get to know them unless you do follow the rules, right? You do need to seek to obey their laws. Kind of like the relationship with our children. Unless they're willing to follow the rules, they're not going to be able to build those relationships, right? Those rules are meant to harbor that, but at the same time, it's got to be more than following the rules. And that's the way it has to be with Jesus Christ and God the Father. We have to actually long to have a relationship with them because they long to have a relationship with us. And women, by design, especially as a wife and a mother, you're in a role to help picture that facet of God's desire for us, just often more naturally than the husband and father can.
And a woman that takes on that role and does the best she can, and which even that can be taken the wrong way. I mean, it's like we're not putting effort in, but you really lean into that role, and you do your best, and you try to help your husband and serve him so he can dedicate himself to other things that will benefit the family. But also, I loved your example there with the boys. And so in this case, Janine had to actually go against a little bit of what her natural instinct on how to deal with things. And so any woman that takes on that role is a valued and treasured person for willing to do that and makes the family go in that way.
Oh, absolutely. I think with my sons, I look at them and I do admire the men they're becoming. It's something I really treasure. I remember once we were here for Charlotte, and I think we were just visiting. I don't know if I lived here yet, but we were here for a family weekend, and we were singing in the hymn where it talks about how they're how your children were growing up like olive trees, and you have our quivers and I just felt so moved, but I am under no illusions. I seriously, in this, that a huge, gigantic part of why if they're coming out good in any way at all, it's been the role that she's played. That if she were missing, that I would not want to actually think about how things would have turned out differently.
I've thought about that before, and I don't like it.
Why do you think about my kids and stuff? No, I'm just kidding. I know what you mean.
Kind of right here reminds me a little bit when I asked my wife about this topic and what she thought about it. And one of the points she wanted to make, this is not popular, but if you want to change the world, if you have a cause that you want to go for, the best way you can do that is by being a wife and a mother. It's sort of like that idea of think globally and act locally. Now, that has a different meaning, I believe, the way that's used, but the concept is solid. Like, you want to fix the world? You want to make our institutions...
What did you say? Think globally, act locally. Is that what you said? Okay, I was afraid it was the other way around. Right. Yeah. Think globally, but act locally, right?
Well, just sort of like I like the other bumper sticker, visualized world peace.
World peas.
Yeah,
Right.
If you want to, so I think about all the things that I think are really broken in the United States, which is a whole lot of things, and whether if you want to argue over the degree into which our public school systems have been corrupted. I mean, there's a lot of what's the 5-person oversight board, school boards, that have gotten activists on them and have pushed an agenda and have pushed things into the libraries that should not be in there, that are not appropriate for young readers. You want to fix all those things? It starts at home with raising your children in a godly way, and that is what. Can you think of anything more noble? Like I feel like modern society, modern progressive thought and idea, and with Satan being behind all of it, has taken, kind of hijacked women's natural desire to want to make an impact and make things better and improve the world around them, and distracted them by wanting them to do it on a big level, global level, go be the CEO of Greenpeace and save the world, when really, if we would all just focus on raising our kids to be good, happy, healthy human beings, a lot of the problems that we have in this world would take care of themselves.
How many, it's study after study, I don't have the statistic, I wish I did. I need to one of the things I always liked about Ben Shapiro is how he just had those facts and figures. And even if he was wrong, you wouldn't even know because he states them so confidently. But there are, and I've seen it on more than one study, about how many of men in prison are fatherless, right?
Yes.
And so we're not doubting the role of fathers. We're not trying to minimize that at all. But part of, not the whole thing, but part of the damage of being fatherless is that the mother who's there can't fully focus on being a mother because she also somehow has to fulfill the role of father. You know, the team is broken. So it's kind of like a child is robbed of a father, but is actually robbed of the opportunity to really enjoy a mother as well in the way that she was meant and designed to be enjoyed. We do have one more topic, and this one we're gonna aim a little bit differently. One of the facets of the design of women that was covered in the sermon was about how women want to be something worth seeking after. They want to know that a husband seeks after them, that they're considered valuable. The way that and I can't, what's the guy's first name? Eggerson, in his book Love and Respect. I can't think of his first name. Well, anyway, this in his book Love and Respect, this fellow, probably his doctor, I have no idea, but Mr. Eggerson.
Oh, you're probably right.
He worded it this way: a woman longs to be first in importance. That is, she wants to know that the man in her life sees her as the most important thing. Now, I'd say, of course, below God, below Jesus Christ, below those things, the faith, that ironically, if you don't put those things first, you become a worse husband for your wife and a worse father for your children. So I'm not trying to knock all of that. We're talking about keeping in mind that a wife or mother, she longs for her husband to have her first in importance in his priorities. Emerson Eggerson. Thank you, Mr. Robertson. So Emerson Eggerson. Okay, well, here's where we'd like to redirect our comments here as we're kind of wrapping up on our last point. And that is, we want to make sure we highlight this to the men who are listening. That is the teens who are future fathers and husbands, and to the young adult men who perhaps some of them already are husbands and fathers. In that, if a woman, your wife or future wife or mother, not your mother or future mother, but the future mother of your children, if that's what's important to her, what does that mean for you in terms of, we've already highlighted, Mr. Robinson has, and I have, that women are constantly facing a barrage of messages that say the role of wife and mother is not valued for being a wife and mother. It's only valued to the point that it's compromised with other masculine characteristics. So what does that mean for you? There's two things that came to mind. One is that you need to help, that she knows she's not just helping you to achieve something for the sake of something that she has nothing to do with, that she is a part of your world, that she's not just a partner with you, but she's actually someone whose success in all of this is actually more important to you than anything else that she is not attached to. She needs to know that she's not just helping you achieve something like a hireling, like someone you would hire on the job, but that she actually has a far more important role for you. And she needs to know that you value her contribution, that she's not just worth seeking after because she's beautiful, but that she's worth seeking after because her presence in your life actually is valuable to you, that it actually serves you. It actually does that in these other things that we've mentioned, she is fulfilling that role in your life and making your life better for that. And that's something that needs to be communicated to her.
Yep. I agree 100%. We talked about this just a little bit beforehand, and I really like the way you put that. Our wives, in my opinion, in my experience, all wives, you could make this case for everybody human on the planet in some sense, but they want to feel valued and appreciated for the contribution they make, but it's on a far deeper level. I remember I was listening to this podcast, not these other ones, not the ones I've been describing. This was a leadership kind of military podcast. It was Jocko's podcast.
All right.
And he had this other guy on, and he was talking about, and he's a Green Beret, and how he'd come back from being deployed, and he was with his wife, and they went to a Starbucks to order something, and he ordered for him, and he said, and my wife would like, and he said, the woman behind the counter, the girl behind the counter said, "Oh, you mean your partner?" And he said, "No, my wife." And he went into some detail about what the difference between a partner and a wife, and I've never forgotten that. And it's so true.
Really?
So like when, and especially in that context, a partner can be just anybody you're casually hooking up with, who you don't have
teammate.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah, and you don't mean necessarily hooking up in the modern sense necessarily, but in some ways, perhaps
some ways,
the
yes.
vulgar way. But
Yeah.
but yeah, someone who's you work alongside,
Yeah, yeah. Whereas a wife, that is a very, very different role, a very honored position when we appreciate it for what it was and how it's been created by God. And let's never forget that. And what is, if when I describe my wife, what would that be? That would be the person I've built a life with, who's had my children, who raised my children. We raised them together. We have approaching 30 years of shared experiences together, where we've over the years morphed into starts to sound so weird, but I mean, like, we're different people.
Yeah, right.
Because of our bond and our relationship. And I would say, regardless of how anyone's feeling about their wife right now, you need to make sure that she feels valued and respected, in my opinion, especially if she's not maybe doing the best she can. Like, you think, well, she's not doing this and doing that. Well, maybe that's because she doesn't feel honored,
right,
appreciated,
right,
for the role she does, which can be an extremely thankless task,
right,
to toil day in and day out, because it's not just some. I mean, you could argue you're putting less effort into your life by having a 9-to-5 job in some sense, compared to the morning to evening role of a wife and a mother. Like, it probably feels like you're never off the clock in some sense. Not that I want to trivialize that relationship down to, a working job, but man, it's a lot of effort put into it. It's just, every year that's gone by, I've appreciated more and more and more what my wife has done and the role she's filled, and it's of incalculable value. Like, I couldn't pay to replace Audrey. Like, I think that's objectively a truth. It doesn't matter if I had Bill Gates type resources. You could not buy the kind of relationship I have with my wife, and the roles she fulfills and the value that she brings to me. I don't think you could. I mean, I think men have tried. Who was it? J. Paul Getty, who said he'd trade in all his wealth for one good marriage.
Yeah, I think so. If it wasn't him, it was a wealthy
Yeah.
fella. That's right. It's something that is not accessible just with funds, and that is a reflection of their Creator as well. It's we mentioned Jeremiah 29:13, other passages where God makes it plain. He wants Israel and us as Christians to seek after him with all of our heart, with all of our soul. And it's not because God is needy in that sense, but if we're not in this kind of pursuit of God, in that mode, our relationship with him is not right. It is a disordered relationship. We should be in pursuit mode of God. We should be, David characterizes it as the deer panting, for water, for something it needs. And so in that sense, a woman who wants to be needed, she is, again, reflecting that there's something there about her Creator that she's kind of reflecting in that way. And it's vital. I really appreciate that insight you mentioned about wife and partner, because, for instance, let's say you're on the job. I was an actuary right before I was in the ministry. Right before that, I was a teacher, and then I was an actuary.
Not a CPA.
Not a CPA.
What does that
That's
stand
right. Ms. Robbins referring to an old joke in textbooks where it says CPA, because those are questions that the accountants would have on their exam. But in actuarial, we used to joke that the CPA stood for can't pass actuarial exams, because that was a terrible joke. Very, very full of themselves. Yeah. That's right. But anyway, so I was an actuary, and I had partners that I work with, right? I remember there was a gal in marketing, and we had a project we were working on together to try to replace a system that we both of our departments had to use. Now, she was a partner. She wasn't a wife, or for that matter, a husband. I wasn't doing what I did for her to build some kind of life or future, right? It was just a partner. I work with other people in the department on different things as a partner. But what our wife wants to know, let me say this as someone, we've been married for a little more than 30 years, and it's easy to fall into certain traps. I know that I had from time to time, and I try not to now. Hopefully after 30 years, you've learned something. Because sometimes you can be so involved in work, and work takes a lot of time, and maybe sometimes it's time at home and not just time at the office. And it's easy for a wife to start to feel like, I thought I was most important. Like we mentioned, it seems like the job is more important than me. Well, as a man, it's too easy to write that off and think, well, no, the only reason I'm doing the job is for us, right? I mean, I've got to put food on the table so we can eat and continue to be alive and be married and have children. So I'm doing this for us. And yet at the same time, it shouldn't be dismissed if she feels it's not, right? Because unlike a partner, a wife needs to be reassured that this isn't just really for me. It actually is for us. Not only is it for us, but that her contributions that make that possible make a huge difference, that it wouldn't be possible unless those things were there. So I know I've tried the last several years in particular, trying to make sure I focus on helping my wife to not just know, but have confidence that I know that I could not do what I do without her. And I don't know if this is true or not, what I'm about to say, not what I just said. I believe that's true. That's why I said it. But I remember way back when I was still an actuary, actuaries do have to sacrifice a lot of family time because the actuarial exams are very burdensome. They're very difficult. And, you're there in a room for 5 hours doing nothing but writing on this one exam, and the studying is intense. And if I recall, maybe things have changed. It's been many years since I was an actuary. But the Society of Actuaries, I heard when they would have their big convention and they would honor all the new fellows of the Society of Actuaries, which I didn't become that before the church hired me, so I didn't get to had the time to earn that. So when they would have their big presentation, that they would make sure they actually honored the spouses as well.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Because they recognized there's no way someone can actually achieve an FSA and actually make it if they did not have the support at home, if they did not have a spouse who was also sacrificing alongside. And I remember being told that. I hope it's true. If we have any young actuaries out there, then let me know if that's true, if they've been there. But I remember hearing that and appreciating that because I know my wife was sacrificing so that we could earn this. And I wanted to make sure she knew not only that I was doing it for her, not just me, but for her and for us, but that also if it weren't for her, I wouldn't be able to do it. There's just no way I could. And a wife, mother needs to know that her contribution is valuable, and that she is worth all this effort. We're not doing it because the object is worth the effort, but because we see her as worth all of this effort. And so this last point, we want to make sure we're directing more towards the guys who will be future husbands and fathers.
Yep. So take us home, Mr. Smith. How would you conclude? What are some points to summarize what we just talked about?
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah, because we're about an hour in, so it would be good to summarize. We'll just try to highlight that women in the role God designed them, and by their design, not because of the things the world values, but the things God values. You are valuable. You do not need the world's validation for who you are. You don't need the kind of accolades the world promises or the markers of success that the world wants to convince you make you a valuable woman. There is a remarkable and astonishing value to being a wife and to being a mother, or to fulfilling these other things in those roles in terms of being a helper and being compassionate. It's interesting when you look at creation. What was the last thing that God created before he said the world was good? It's interesting. He creates light and dark, and he goes, oh, it's good. And he creates, he separates the waters. Oh, it's good. And each day of creation, he said, oh, that's good, that's good, that's good, that's good. And then he creates man. And we know from not just the first initial description, but later, he doesn't create man and woman at the same time. He creates man first. He creates man first and hasn't created woman yet. And that's the only time when God says, this is not good. He says, it's not good that it's not good that he did it, but he hasn't finished it yet. Mm-hmm. He finishes creation with creating woman. Woman, in that sense, completes the creation. And it's notable that once creation is completed, then he doesn't just say it's good. He says it is very good. We should be willing to embrace passionately the roles that God has designed for us, whether men or women, because God does know what he's doing, and we need to make sure we learn to value what he values, not what this messed up world is trying to get us to value.
And this messed up world is trying to convince you that you'll achieve fulfillment and happiness on a path outside of how God has structured it. And it's just not.
It's a lie.
It is a lie. And it's not, again, not popular these days, this idea. But I'm sorry. No, I'm not sorry. I'm not sorry. When young women marry their husbands, and, make sure you pick a good one, when you fulfill that role, that is, it may take some time, but like your ultimate fulfillment and satisfaction and happiness is a result. Achieving happiness is not something you can actually pursue in one sense. Having meaning and fulfillment in your life brings about happiness, and you'll especially, that's one of the things that I really appreciate that Dr. Peterson has pointed out in the past, which was women in their 20s don't realize how much their life priorities will change as they're hitting 30, which is they heavily begin to prioritize their families. And you'll never be sorry that you prioritized your family. And then looking back, the ages you and I are, where we have grown children, and the next stop is grandchildren, how much more rewarding and fulfilling is it to look back at what you've done, if raising your children and then seeing grandchildren.
Yeah, seeing the fruit of that.
Yeah.
And then if we look at the furthest distance, what is God trying to do with all of us? And this is men or women. He's making us, turning us into the bride of Christ. He's making a wife of all of us, whether we're men or women. We will all be Christ's bride. And in the end, take these things in which women have the capacity, a special capacity, to reflect their Creator, and then consider what God is going to turn all of us into in the millennium and beyond. He's going to turn all of us into helpers who have been made comparable to Him. He is going to turn us into a bride who focuses on nurturing others and having compassion on others. And in the millennium, we'll be experts at fostering those relationships between these people and God. In a very real way, the characteristics that a wife and mother are given to be able to display into the world are characteristics that God will weave into all of our lives for eternity.
Smith and Robinson.